the SCO Summit, and we had somehow India was, in my opinion, was a game changer. The way that India somehow
Mhm.
is getting closer to Russia and China. What was your understanding of that?
Well, you've headlined our podcast today, the SCO backfire on Trump, and it was more than that. But it certainly was a big, big backfire with some very interesting things that aren't in the press. Let's look at Trump's defeat first, and then we look at the victory for India, China, and Russia, because that has to be qualified too. First, Trump, let's remember, has claimed to have made peace between Pakistan and India, between Iran and Israel, between Azerbaijan and Armenia, for example. Now, inside the SCO, he had, President Trump had three particular, you could say informants, you could say allies, or our audience might simply call them stooges. One was Shehbaz Sharif, the Prime Minister of Pakistan. The other was Nikol Pashinyan, the Prime Minister of Armenia. And the third, a bit of a surprise, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the President of Turkey. Let me explain why they qualify as the defeated Trump stooges at this meeting. Shehbaz Sharif, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, has been made fun of in a lot of videos in which you see him chasing, literally moving towards President Putin as he walked past in order to shake his hand. I can't make out from the video whether he actually succeeded in shaking Putin's hand. The important thing is, however, that Pakistan had succeeded 3 months ago at the foreign ministers meeting of SCO in keeping out mention in the final declaration of Pahalgam. Pahalgam was the terrorist attack launched by Pakistan supported proxies, terrorists, which killed, I think, 26 Indians in the Kashmir region. It led to Indian retaliation and the short war between India and Pakistan, which President Trump has claimed to have settled. That being a lie, the important thing is that following that, a very significant reorientation of Pakistan, led by the army chief, who visited Trump for lunch at the White House and reoriented Pakistan in line with US goals, including making war through Balochistan on Iran in the West. Now, Sharif was ignored by President Xi Jinping, by Mr. Modi, the Prime Minister of India, and by President Putin. He met with the Iranian President, Mr. Pezeshkian, but he was generally ignored. More important, in the Tianjin Declaration, Pahalgam was mentioned by name, and condemned not only as a terrorist act, but as part of a process that was condemned, the movement of terrorists across borders. And that has some relevance to the Ukraine-Russia conflict, which I'll come to in a minute. But the interesting thing is 3 months ago, 12 weeks ago, Pakistan was able to block the explicit mention of Pahalgam, the trigger for the war. And yet they failed this week in Tianjin. Now, that's a very significant defeat, not only of Pakistan, but indirectly of the United States, which has now become Pakistan's increasing military and strategic ally, in a resumption of the old relationship that Pakistan had with the United States. But it also means that this is a signal in China that China recognizes that this is what's happening. That's the Pakistan-Indian issue, which is revealed by looking back at what SCO did 3 months ago and looking at what they've said in the Tianjin Declaration. Now, I'm very sorry, folks. It's very difficult to get the 20-page Tianjin Declaration, and one has to say that the Chinese state media are incompetent in getting out the 20 pages. Instead, they want us to read their summary of it, which is a great pity. Second stooge is Nikol Pashinyan, the Armenian. He was, it's rather amusing because there is a discussion, and we've had it on this podcast before, of the Zangezur corridor. Let's just remind everybody that without using a map and without boring your brains off this morning, this is the corridor between mainland Azerbaijan and its territory Nakhichevan, crossing the southern limit of Armenia at the Iranian border. It's called Zangezur. That's a geographical name and has an interesting long history, which I won't bore you with. However, the Azerbaijan president, Mr. Aliyev, clearly mentioned that in the bilateral talks, in the off-center talks that were going on with himself, Pashinyan, and Erdogan, the Turkish president, and others at this meeting, there was a long discussion of corridors of trade. Now, that's important to China, it's important to India, it's important to everyone in the SCO, because it connects them to the markets of the Far East, the Indo-Pacific Ocean, and so on. What Aliyev said was that with Chinese support, there is support for connectivity, transport corridors, massive investment in North-South corridor, the Middle corridor, and Zangezur. And he used that word. Now, Pashinyan pops up and gets his press to pump out and say, we reject Mr. Aliyev's use of the term Zangezur because we think it should be called the TRIP, the Trump, what was it called again? I've forgotten. Trump route for international peace and prosperity. TRIP. Pashinyan had the nerve in Tianjin to say, you mustn't call it by its geographical name, you must call it by its Trump name. And we reject what Mr. Aliyev said. If that's the best that a supporter of Trump can do inside the expanded SCO, it's a clear defeat, a clear backfire. It also backfires on Trump's claim to have made peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan, of which the Zangezur corridor, the TRIP, is the centerpiece. Because remember, folks, what we've explained before, Trump's idea is that the Zangezur corridor will become American. It will be occupied by American soldiers. Of course, they'll be mercenaries. They'll be private contractors protecting U.S. interests along the road. In other words, the first establishment of a U.S. territory on the Iranian border. It's quite a big Trumpian pitch. It was defeated by the Chinese and others at Tianjin. Now, let's go on to what Mr. Erdogan, the president of Turkey, had to say. He looked decidedly ill and uncomfortable in all his meetings. Now, I don't have any inside information about Erdogan's state of health. But let's just point out that if you look carefully at what he said, you get, on the one hand, a reference to Israel's genocide in Gaza, and the preposterous claim that Turkey is doing everything possible to stop it. But he doesn't mention Israel's expansion into Syria. he doesn't mention that for a rather obvious reason, that Turkey has expanded into Syria too. Now, here we have SCO, an organization of regional, starting with border security, military cooperation to minimize border wars between its own members, and to create a collectivity for peaceful settlement of border and frontier conflicts of its members. And here's Turkey forgetting to mention that it is occupying and partitioning Syria in alliance with the Americans and with the Israelis. It's, in other words, President Erdogan wins the Tianjin medal for Cant, C-A-N-T, hypocrisy and faking. And he goes on to say, I'm sorry, I'm laughing, that he wants to contribute, that how Turkey has contributed to the desperate food needs of the world through its role in facilitating the not the breaking of the Gaza starvation genocide. No. We don't talk about Turkey's role in stopping the flotillas that once had Turkish state support to break the Israeli blockade of Gaza. No, he doesn't mean that. He means, and he says, the Black Sea Initiative. That was a Turkish-Ukrainian United Nations operation to enable the exportation of Ukrainian grain out of the southern ports around Odessa, for example, to the world. Only Russia's objected. It never fed the low-income starvation countries. The wheat went principally into the European trade system. So everything really that Erdogan said is either insincere or false. Now, and you remember that Erdogan, Turkey, is the only NATO member in the SCO, and it's just had its version of a border war. So you might say it's in violation of the SCO principles. But those are the three stooges. Pakistan, Armenia, and Turkey fail. Let's see what succeeds and what wins. As you began, Nima, yes, it's not just the optics. A very important a determination to align themselves and end the border conflict, increase the trade, increase the mutual investment between India and China. This is very important, and that's what you meant in the headline. That's a seriously big backfire on the United States. And it's in the Tianjin Declaration as the determination of the members to develop multipolarity and individual independent sovereignty and so forth. So this is a major achievement. Bilaterally, there's a major agreement between Russia and China to start the Power of Siberia 2 gas pipeline from Russia across Mongolia into China. This has been delayed in principle and in practice for years.
It's huge, John. It's huge.
It's a very, very big agreement. We don't see the text of it. Gazprom was the signatory. And it appears to be more than a memorandum of understanding. There have been lots of those. No, this one's a commitment to construct the pipeline, which implies there is more or less agreement on the pricing formula for gas that satisfied both the Russian shipper and the Chinese off-taker. So this is a very big win in Tianjin. Linked to that is the Tianjin Declaration of the formation of an energy club. In other words, building up against the Trump campaign to damage anyone who buys Russian oil or gas, we'll come back to that in a minute, is the commitment of the SCO to pool and collectivize their resources to resist, to redevelop their energy trade so as to resist the American attempts to destroy the Russian SCO oil trade. Now, those are really major achievements of SCO, but you could say, as you said yourself, Nima, it's Modi and Xi on the front of the stage. Now, there's something really odd and missing. Why is there no mention of the Ukraine war? None. Now, let me look down and read you what President Putin had to say, and then what followed from Yuri Ushakov's explanation of what had been achieved in Tianjin. President Putin gave two speeches, one at the Heads of Council meeting, September 1, and he said, I would note that the understandings reached at the recent Russian-US summit in Alaska, I hope, are also moving in this direction of settling the Ukraine crisis, paving the way towards peace in the Ukraine. In fact, yesterday at the luncheon, our host kindly arranged for participants in the SCO meetings. President Xi and I already discussed this issue. I briefed him in detail on the agreements reached during my talks with the President of the United States. Naturally, for Ukrainian settlement to be sustainable and lasting, the root cause of the crisis I've just mentioned, spoken about many times, must be addressed. But note what he said first was understandings reached in Anchorage. Then he said agreements reached in Anchorage. Well, there's a big difference there. We'll come back to it. But he doesn't explain at all. He glides over the failure of the SCO to make any statement on the Ukraine war. So here's what Yuri Ushakov, the foreign policy advisor at the Kremlin to President Putin, has said yesterday, it's in September to TASS, as how the topic of the Ukraine was spoken of at the summit. At the SCO Summit, Putin briefed many of his peers about his meeting with US President Trump in Alaska. President talked about this, many colleagues, including Xi Jinping and, of course, the Prime Minister of India. The Ukraine issue was discussed on the sidelines of the SCO Summit. On the sidelines, it was discussed, quotes. There's no getting around talking about that. I also said yesterday our president discussed the agreements reached in Anchorage with President Trump. This is very peculiar, and it isn't discussed or explained in the Russian press, and I haven't seen, pardon me, any public discussion of whether that represents a failure on the Russian side, because that's what the Ukrainians are saying. The Ukrainians have come out and said there's no mention of the Ukraine in the Tianjin Declaration. There isn't. That's correct. Is it a defeat of Russian diplomacy? Yuri Ushakov says we did a lot of talking on the sidelines. That seems to corroborate that in the plenary session and in the final declaration, how come there's no mention of the Ukraine, but there is mention of Pahalgam? How come the Indians succeeded in 12 weeks in overcoming Pakistani opposition, and yet the Russians couldn't? Answer, and this is entirely speculative, and I can hear the screaming from our podcast audience, the Chinese didn't want it. The Chinese did want Pakistan to be taken down a peg or two, a serious peg on the war and their reorientation to the United States. The Chinese did not want some whatever proposal. Now, was it Chinese and Indian? Well, there's something very peculiar going on, and I don't understand it. I'll just explain it. It goes to the question of whether President Trump knows what he's doing, whether he has a mind at all. It's another topic, we can get on to it.